The divorce papers came with a restraining order and a lie that cost Rebecca Chen everything: her home, her daughter's college fund, and her medical practice. 3 months later, living in a basement studio with mold on the walls, she got a call about her estranged uncle's will. What she inherited was a joke, a derelict research station on an island in the Bering Sea, worth exactly $1. But what she found sealed beneath 40 years of Arctic ice wasn't just frozen specimens. It was 389 million in geological samples, rare earth minerals.
If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today.
And Cold War secrets that powerful corporations had been hunting for since 1983. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The basement apartment smelled like mildew and failure. Rebecca Chen pressed her face against the single ground-level window, watching feet walk past on the sidewalk above, each pair of shoes representing a life that was still intact, still moving forward, still believing tomorrow would be better than today. Her daughter Emma sat on the pull-out couch they shared, doing homework under a lamp that flickered every time the upstairs neighbors walked across their floor. She was 12 years old and hadn't complained once about losing their house, losing her school, losing the bedroom with the bay window, where she used to read for hours. Rebecca's throat tightened watching her. Emma deserved so much better than this, better than a mother who'd trusted the wrong man, better than a studio apartment with water damage and a bathroom door that didn't lock, better than wearing last year's winter coat because this year's budget didn't include new clothes. "Mom," Emma said without looking up from her math textbook, "Mrs. Patterson asked if I'm okay. She said I seemed distracted in class." "What did you tell her?" "That we moved and I'm adjusting, that everything's fine." Everything was not fine. Everything hadn't been fine since the day Marcus, her ex-husband, had walked into their home with a police escort and accused her of things that made her stomach turn just remembering them: theft from her own medical practice, prescription fraud, endangering patients. All lies, every single word, but lies delivered by an attorney who cost more per hour than Rebecca made in a week. The family court judge had believed Marcus because Marcus was calm, collected, had documentation forged so expertly that Rebecca's public defender couldn't prove they were fake. The restraining order meant she couldn't go near Emma's school, couldn't attend parent-teacher conferences, could only see her daughter during supervised visits until the custody hearing. Except Marcus never showed up for the custody hearing. He'd taken his new girlfriend to Maui instead, and by some miracle or oversight, Emma had been delivered to Rebecca's basement apartment by a social worker who seemed too tired to care about the details. That was 6 weeks ago. Rebecca lived in constant fear that someone would notice, would realize Emma wasn't supposed to be here, would take her away again. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Bill collectors had her number, called constantly, left messages that started sympathetic and ended threatening. But something made her answer. "Is this Dr. Rebecca Chen? I'm not practicing medicine right now." Her medical license was suspended pending investigation into Marcus's accusations. Another casualty of believing someone when they said they loved you. "My name is Harold Vance. I'm an attorney in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm calling about your uncle, Dr. David Chen." Rebecca's breath caught. Uncle David, her father's younger brother, the one who disappeared into Arctic research 40 years ago and never came back. She'd met him exactly once at her father's funeral when she was 8 years old. He'd been strange, intense, talking about ice cores and geological timescales, while everyone else talked about casseroles and sympathy. What about him? "He passed away 6 weeks ago. I'm sorry for your loss. You've been named in his will." Rebecca almost laughed. Of course. Of course the universe would wait until she'd lost everything before dangling inheritance in front of her. What did he leave me? A property, specifically a former research station on St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Sea. It's been abandoned since 1983. The structure is condemned. The land is considered contaminated from industrial use. Fair market value is assessed at $1. This time, Rebecca did laugh, a sound without humor. So my uncle, who I met once 40 years ago, left me a toxic waste site in Alaska worth $1. That's correct. However, you'll need to sign paperwork to accept the inheritance. There are liability considerations. If you'd prefer to disclaim, I'll take it. Vance paused. Dr. Chen, I should be clear about what you're accepting. The property requires environmental remediation, estimated at several $100,000. You'll be responsible for any accidents or injuries that occur on the premises. The structure is actively deteriorating and poses significant safety hazards. Most people in your position would decline. Most people in my position, Rebecca said quietly, don't have a 12-year-old daughter living in a basement apartment with black mold. A property worth $1 is still $1 more than I have now. Another pause. I can arrange for the paperwork to be handled remotely. You'll need to visit the site at some point to assess the property, but that can wait. How do I get there? I'm sorry? To the island, to the research station. I want to see it. Dr. Chen, it's November. The Bering Sea is not... How do I get there? Vance sighed, the sound of someone who'd learned not to argue with people who'd run out of options. There's a supply flight that goes to Gamble Village on St. Lawrence Island twice a week. Weather permitting. From there, you'd need to hire a guide with a boat or snowmobile. The research station is on the eastern end of the island, about 15 miles from the village. It's not an easy journey. When's the next flight? Wednesday, but Dr. Chen... Book me on it. Send the paperwork. I'll sign whatever you need. She hung up before he could talk her out of it. Emma was watching her now, homework forgotten. Mom, what's in Alaska? A research station, your great-uncle's old workplace. He left it to me. Is it worth money? Rebecca looked at her daughter's hopeful face and felt her heart break all over again. No, baby, but it's ours. That's worth something. The flight from Seattle to Nome took 6 hours. The flight from Nome to Gamble took another 90 minutes, in a plane that looked like it had been held together with duct tape and prayers. Rebecca gripped her seat, watching ice floes drift through gray water below, while the pilot hummed along to country music and seemed completely unconcerned that they were flying over the Bering Sea in weather that had grounded every other aircraft. Emma had stayed with Rebecca's mother in Seattle. It had taken 3 hours of convincing before her mother agreed to watch Emma, 3 hours of listening to lectures about responsibility and poor choices and how Rebecca had ruined her life by divorcing Marcus instead of making it work. He was abusing me, Rebecca had said quietly. Marriage requires compromise, her mother had replied, as if compromise meant accepting lies and theft, and a man who'd destroyed her career for sport. Gamble was a village of about 600 people, mostly Yupik, living on the northwest cape of St. Lawrence Island. The houses were small, brightly colored, built to withstand winds that could strip paint from metal. Rebecca stepped off the plane into cold so intense it felt like being slapped. A man approached, mid-50s, weathered face, wearing a parka that had seen decades of use. Dr. Chen? Yes. Tom Kaverluk, Harold Vance hired me to take you to the old research station. You sure you want to go out there? Weather's turning. Rebecca looked at the gray sky, the wind whipping snow into her face, the ice extending to the horizon. I'm sure. Tom studied her for a moment, then nodded. Your uncle was a good man.
If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this.
Strange, but good. Used to come to the village sometimes, bring supplies, talk about rocks and ice like they were the most important things in the world. You knew him. Everyone knew Dr. David. He lived out there for 3 years, completely alone, working on something he said was going to change everything. Then one day the government came, locked everything up, and he disappeared. Nobody saw him again until his body was found in Anchorage last month. How did he die? Tom's expression darkened. Official report says heart attack, but Dr. David was being followed in his last weeks. People in suits asking questions about the research station, about what he'd found out there. Some of us think it wasn't natural. Rebecca's pulse quickened. What did he find? He never said. But whatever it was, someone wanted it. Still wants it, probably. You should be careful, Dr. Chen. That station has a bad history. 3 researchers died there before it closed. People say the place is cursed, but I think it's just dangerous. Old equipment, unstable structures, chemical contamination. The permafrost is melting, undermining the foundations. It could collapse at any time. They drove to the eastern end of the island in Tom's truck, following a road that was barely more than tracks in the snow. The landscape was flat, endless, beautiful in its desolation. Rebecca had never seen so much empty space, so much silence. The research station appeared on the horizon like a vision from a nightmare. 3 buildings connected by enclosed walkways, all painted that institutional gray-green that screamed government funding and Cold War paranoia. The metal was rusted, the windows were broken or missing entirely, the walkways sagged in the middle where ice had buckled the supports. Tom parked a safe distance away. "I'll wait here. You've got 2 hours before we need to head back if we want to make it before dark." Rebecca got out, staring at the station. Her inheritance, her $1 property, the punchline to a joke that had stopped being funny months ago. She approached carefully, testing each step. The main building had a door hanging by one hinge. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was worse than the exterior. Equipment lay scattered across floors, papers drifted in corners. Where wind had blown through broken windows, ice covered everything in a crystalline layer that made the whole place look like a museum dedicated to abandonment. But as Rebecca moved through the rooms, she noticed things that didn't fit. The equipment wasn't just old, it was sophisticated, expensive, far beyond what a simple geology research station should need. Electron microscopes covered in ice, spectrographic analyzers still plugged into dead outlets, a vault door in the back wall, heavy steel with a combination lock. Rebecca approached the vault, her breath fogging in the frozen air. The lock was covered in frost, but when she brushed it away, she saw numbers had been scratched into the metal beside it. Not scratched, etched deliberately, carefully. 08-15-1983, a date, August 15, 1983. She tried the combination. Right to 08, left past it to 15, right to 83. The vault clicked. Rebecca pulled the handle, putting her full weight into it. The door swung open on hinges that shrieked from disuse, revealing a room beyond that was larger than she'd expected, extending deep into the permafrost, carved out of ice and rock and lined with metal shelving. And on those shelves, in containers designed to withstand decades of freezing temperatures, were core samples. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Geological specimens, ice cores, rock. Samples, all labeled in her uncle's careful handwriting. But they weren't just samples. Each container had a second label, a code, and a number, large numbers. Rebecca picked up the nearest container. The code read PT-105. The number below it, $287,000. She picked up another, AU-198, $412,000. Another, REE Complex 7, $1,900,000. Her hands started shaking. She moved deeper into the vault, reading labels, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. These weren't just geological samples, they were assets. Platinum, gold, rare earth elements. Minerals so valuable that single samples were worth more than most people made in a year. And there were thousands of them. At the back of the vault, she found a filing cabinet. Inside, organized with the same meticulous care as everything else, were documents, analysis reports, market valuations, letters from mining companies, from the Department of Defense, from corporations she'd never heard of, all offering to purchase the samples, all dated between 1983 and 2024. The most recent letter was from 3 months ago, a company called Bering Minerals Group, offering $45 million for the entire collection, warning that failure to respond would result in more aggressive acquisition methods. Rebecca sat down hard on the frozen floor, papers clutched in her shaking hands. Her uncle hadn't been doing simple research. He'd been conducting a mineral survey, discovering deposits of rare earth elements worth hundreds of millions, extracting samples, documenting everything. And then someone had shut him down, locked the station, scattered the researchers, buried the whole project. But David Chen had kept the samples, had hidden them here in this vault, in this abandoned station, protected by isolation and ice and the assumption that nothing valuable could possibly be stored in a place assessed at $1. There was a letter at the bottom of the cabinet, addressed to her. The envelope was new, the paper inside fresh. Her uncle had written it recently, knowing what was coming. Rebecca, if you're reading this, then I'm dead and you've found what I've been protecting for 41 years. I'm sorry for the burden, but you're the only family I trust. Your father told me you have integrity, intelligence, and courage. You'll need all three. In 1982, I discovered the largest rare earth element deposit in North America, possibly the world. The samples in this vault represent less than 1% of what's beneath St. Lawrence Island. The full deposit is estimated to be worth between $70 and $80 billion. The government buried my findings because rare earth mining would have required native land rights negotiations, environmental impact studies, and public disclosure. It was easier to classify everything, shut down the station, and pretend the discovery never happened. But I kept the samples, I kept the data, and I've been sitting on it for 4 decades, waiting for the right time, the right person to bring it to light. The samples alone are worth approximately $389 million at current market prices. I've maintained relationships with private collectors, research institutions, and corporations who would purchase them immediately, legally, if offered through proper channels. The lawyer, Harold Vance, knows some of this. He has instructions for authenticating and selling the collection, but he doesn't know everything. Only you will. There's a second vault beneath this one. The entrance is hidden under the examination table in the main lab. The samples in that vault are more sensitive. Technology demonstrations, weapons-grade materials, things that were classified in 1983 and remain classified today. Don't open that vault. Don't acknowledge its existence. Those samples stay buried. But the rare earth elements, the platinum, the gold, those are yours. Sell them carefully. Use the money wisely. And most importantly, don't let the corporations intimidate you. They'll try. They've been trying to get these samples since 1983. They killed 3 of my colleagues to prevent the research from becoming public. They may have killed me, though I doubt they'll list it as murder. Stand firm. You have legal ownership. You have documentation. You have leverage. Use it. Your uncle, David Chen, P.S. The combination to the lower vault is your birth date, if you're ever forced to acknowledge its existence. I pray you never are. Rebecca read the letter 3 times, her mind racing. $389 million in mineral samples, a hidden vault with classified materials, corporations willing to kill to keep this quiet, her uncle's suspicious death, She'd inherited more than a research station. She'd inherited a war. "Dr. Chen," Tom's voice echoed through the building. "We need to go. Weather's getting bad." Rebecca carefully folded the letter, tucked it into her jacket, and closed the vault door. She spun the combination lock, making sure it was secure, then made her way back through the station to where Tom was waiting. "Everything okay?" he asked, studying her face. "Fine, just a lot of old equipment, nothing valuable." Tom didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. They drove back to Gamble in silence, the wind picking up, snow beginning to fall in heavy, wet flakes that stuck to the windshield. At the airstrip, Tom touched her arm. "Dr. Chen, whatever you found out there, be careful who you tell. This island has long memories. We remember what happened to the researchers. We remember the men in suits. And we remember Dr. David's warning that powerful people wanted what he'd discovered." "What did he tell you?" "That the island was sitting on a fortune, that the fortune belonged to the native people whose land this was, that corporations would do anything to take it, and that someday someone honest would inherit the responsibility to make it right." Tom met her eyes. "I think that person is you." Rebecca flew back to Seattle with her uncle's letter pressed against her chest like a talisman. She picked up Emma from her mother's house, ignored the lecture about responsibility and poor choices, and drove back to their basement apartment with her mind spinning. 389 million. The number was so large it stopped feeling real. She could pay off her legal debt, could hire lawyers who actually knew what they were doing, could fight Marcus properly, prove his accusations were lies, get her medical license restored, could give Emma a home, a future, a life. But first, she had to secure the samples, had to authenticate them, had to find buyers who wouldn't ask too many questions about where the materials came from. She called Harold Vance from the parking lot of their apartment building. "Dr. Chen, how was the site visit?" "Educational. I need your help with something sensitive." "I'm listening." "My uncle left more than just the research station. There are materials at the site that require proper handling, valuable materials. I need legal assistance authenticating and selling them." Silence on the line. Then, carefully, "What kind of materials?" "Geological samples, rare earth elements, properly documented, legally obtained, but sensitive due to their origin and value." "How valuable?" Rebecca took a breath. "Roughly 389 million, according to my uncle's records." More silence. Then, "Dr. Chen, I think we should meet in person. Can you come to Anchorage?" "Not without my daughter. I'm not leaving her." "Bring her. I'll arrange accommodation. We need to discuss this properly, and I need to see your uncle's documentation. If what you're saying is accurate, you've inherited something that will attract a great deal of attention. Dangerous attention." They flew to Anchorage 2 days later. Harold Vance met them at his office, a modest suite in a building that had seen better decades. He was in his 60s, lean, sharp-eyed, with the careful manner of someone who'd spent a career navigating legal gray areas. Emma sat in the waiting room with a paralegal who seemed genuinely happy to have someone to talk to. Rebecca spread her uncle's documents across Vance's desk and watched his expression change from skeptical to shocked to deeply concerned. "Christ," he muttered, reading through the analysis reports. "Your uncle was sitting on a gold mine, literally." "Can we sell the samples?" "Legally, yes. The samples were extracted during authorized research under government contract. Your uncle had legal custody. You inherited that custody. The ownership is clean." He looked up. "But selling them will trigger attention you might not want. Mining companies have been looking for these samples for 40 years. Once word gets out that you have them, you'll be under pressure from corporations with resources you can't imagine." "What kind of pressure?" "Legal challenges to ownership, attempts to classify the materials retroactively, offers that sound generous but include clauses that strip you of all rights. And if those don't work, he trailed off meaningfully. You think they'd hurt us? I think 3 researchers died mysteriously in 1983. I think your uncle spent 40 years hiding from people. I think when you logged the inheritance transfer, someone was notified. You've already been flagged, Dr. Chen. The question is what you do next. Rebecca thought about Marcus, about how easily he'd destroyed her career with lies and forged documents. Thought about how the legal system had believed him because he could afford better lawyers. Thought about living in a basement with her daughter, working at a coffee shop because no hospital would hire her with a suspended license. I'm not running, she said quietly. I'm not hiding. My uncle protected these samples for 41 years because they were worth protecting, because they represented something important. I'm going to honor that. I'm going to sell them properly legally, and I'm going to use the money to rebuild my life and my daughter's future. Vance studied her for a long moment. Then we need to move fast. I know buyers, private collectors, research institutions, corporations that operate legally. We'll authenticate the samples, create a catalog, and arrange discreet sales. But you need to be prepared for backlash, for legal challenges, for people who will do everything possible to take this from you. Let them try. Over the next 3 weeks, Vance organized everything. A security company removed the samples from the research station under cover of darkness, transporting them to a secure facility in Anchorage. Authentication experts examined each sample, verifying purity and documenting origin. Buyers were contacted through discreet channels, people who understood the value and were willing to pay market rates without asking difficult questions. The sales began in December. Small transactions at first, individual samples to collectors and research institutions. Then larger deals, bulk purchases of rare earth elements to technology companies that needed them for manufacturing. By January, Rebecca had deposited $127 million into accounts Vance had established. By February, another $189 million. By March, the final sales were complete. $372,000 minus legal fees, minus authentication costs, minus taxes that would be handled through careful planning. When everything was settled, Rebecca Chen, homeless single mother with a suspended medical license and a daughter living in a basement apartment, had access to approximately $267 million. See, but the money was only part of the story, because the moment the first sales became public, the corporations descended like sharks sensing blood. Bering Minerals Group filed suit, claiming the samples had been stolen from research they'd funded. The Department of Interior launched an investigation into whether the materials were classified. 3 different law firms sent letters demanding Rebecca cease all sales and turn over the materials. And Marcus, her ex-husband, suddenly reappeared. He filed an emergency motion claiming the inheritance was marital property acquired during their marriage, and he was entitled to half. The legal battles were vicious, expensive, and exhausting. But this time, Rebecca had resources. She hired attorneys who made Marcus's lawyers look like high school debate team. She hired investigators who discovered the truth about the forged documents, about Marcus's theft from her practice, about the lies he'd told in family court. Within 6 months, every criminal charge against her was dropped. Her medical license was fully restored. Marcus was charged with fraud and theft. The custody arrangement was reversed, and the corporations learned what it meant to fight someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. By the time the dust settled, 18 months after Rebecca had first answered Harold Vance's call, she stood in the living room of a house she'd purchased with cash. A real house with a yard where Emma could play, with bedrooms that had doors that locked, with windows that let in light instead of watching feet walk past on sidewalks. Emma was at school. Not private school, not elite academy, just a good public school in a safe neighborhood where she could be a normal kid without the weight of their struggles crushing her. Rebecca looked around at the furniture they'd chosen together, at the photographs on the walls, at the kitchen where she'd cooked breakfast that morning, without worrying about whether she could afford groceries. And she thought about her uncle, living alone in an Arctic research station, protecting a fortune for decades because he believed it belonged to people who would use it honorably. She'd honored that trust. She'd used the money to rebuild her life, to secure Emma's future, to prove that integrity and perseverance mattered even when the system was rigged against you. But she'd also done something else, something her uncle would have appreciated. She'd established the Chen Foundation for Indigenous Land Rights, dedicating $50 million to helping Native communities like the Yupik people of St. Lawrence Island protect their land and resources from corporate exploitation. She'd worked with the foundation to fund legal challenges, environmental studies, and community education programs, because her uncle had been right. The fortune beneath St. Lawrence Island belonged to the people whose land it was. The samples he'd protected were just the beginning of a much larger conversation about ownership, about justice, about who got to profit from resources and who got left behind. Rebecca's phone rang. Harold Vance. "Dr. Chen, we need to talk about the second vault." Her blood ran cold. "I told you, there is no second vault." The Department of Defense disagrees. They've filed a petition claiming classified materials are stored at the research station. They want access to the site, and they want you to provide the location of any sealed chambers. "I don't know what they're talking about." "Rebecca." Vance's voice was gentle. "I know about the second vault. Your uncle told me. Said if anyone ever came asking, I should help you protect it. Those materials can't surface. Ever. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good. Because people who know about that vault tend to die mysteriously. Your uncle spent 40 years making sure it stayed buried. Don't let curiosity or pressure undo that work." Rebecca thought about the letter, about her uncle's warning, about the combination he'd given her that she'd never used and never would. "The vault doesn't exist," she said firmly. "There are geological samples properly documented and legally sold. That's all. If the Department of Defense wants to search an abandoned research station, they're welcome to dig through 40 years of ice and rubble. They won't find anything that isn't supposed to be there." "Good answer." After they hung up, Rebecca stood at her kitchen window, watching Emma's school bus approach. Her daughter would be home in 2 minutes, full of stories about her day, about her friends, about the science project she was working on. Normal stories, normal life. The kind of life Rebecca had thought she'd lost forever when Marcus had destroyed everything with lies and legal documents. But she'd found her way back. Through an inheritance worth $1, through samples frozen in Arctic ice, through an uncle who'd believed in protecting what mattered and trusting the right person to carry on that work. Emma burst through the door, backpack bouncing, face flushed with cold and excitement. "Mom, we're learning about geology in science class. Did you know there are minerals that are worth millions of dollars? Our teacher said most of them are in places that are hard to reach, like under the ocean or in mountains or frozen in ice." Rebecca smiled, pulling her daughter into a hug. "I did know that, actually." "How?" "Your great-uncle taught me. He was a geologist. He spent his whole life studying rocks and ice and trying to understand what was hidden beneath the surface." "Was he rich?" Rebecca thought about the question, about what rich really meant. "No, baby. But he was wealthy in ways that mattered more than money. He was patient. He was honest. He protected important things. And he taught me that sometimes the most valuable inheritances are the ones that don't look valuable at first." Emma considered this, then shrugged with the easy acceptance of children who hadn't yet learned to question good fortune. "Can we have pizza for dinner?" "Absolutely." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Rebecca sat at her desk and wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular, just to document the story, to create a record that would exist if anything happened to her. If the corporations came back, if the Department of Defense decided to push harder. She wrote about the research station, about the samples, about her uncle's 40-year vigil protecting something he believed mattered. She wrote about the sales, the legal battles, the victory that had felt impossible but had happened anyway. And she wrote about the second vault, the one she'd never opened, the one that contained materials her uncle had warned should stay buried forever. She documented its location, its contents as described in his letter, and her decision to honor his wishes by leaving it sealed. The letter went into her safety deposit box at the bank, along with copies of all the documentation from the sample sales. Insurance in case the corporations got creative, leverage in case the government pushed too hard, protection for Emma, who deserved a future free from her mother's battles. But as Rebecca locked the safety deposit box and drove home through Seattle's rainy streets, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope, not the desperate kind that came from having no options, but the solid kind that came from knowing you could handle whatever came next. She'd inherited a research station worth $1. She'd discovered a fortune that had changed her life. She'd fought corporations and ex-husbands and a legal system designed to crush people without resources. And she'd won. Not because she was special or lucky or blessed with anything, except stubbornness and a dead uncle who'd believed she was worth trusting, just because she'd refused to give up. Because she'd opened a vault in an Arctic research station and decided that whatever was inside was worth fighting for. Because sometimes the most important inheritance isn't money or property or rare earth minerals worth hundreds of millions. Sometimes it's just the knowledge that you're stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and capable of rebuilding from ruins that looked permanent. Rebecca pulled into her driveway, looked at her house with its warm lights glowing in the darkness, and smiled. They'd tried to break her. Her ex-husband, the corporations, the legal system, the whole machinery of power that ground down people without resources and left them desperate. But they'd failed, because she'd inherited something more valuable than money. She'd inherited resilience and a fortune frozen in ice, and that had made all the difference. The Foundation's first anniversary gala was held in a hotel ballroom overlooking Elliott Bay. Rebecca stood near the windows, watching ferries cross the dark water, feeling distinctly out of place among the crowd of activists, attorneys, and indigenous leaders who'd gathered to celebrate what the Chen Foundation had accomplished in just 12 months. $50 million distributed to 17 native communities, 3 major legal victories against mining corporations, 2 environmental protection laws passed at the state level, hundreds of families helped, thousands of acres protected, a movement building momentum towards something that might actually change how resources and land rights were handled in America. Emma was across the room talking animatedly with Tom Kaverluk's granddaughter, both girls wearing traditional Yupik beaded necklaces Tom's wife had made for them. Emma had been to St. Lawrence Island twice now, had learned some Siberian Yupik phrases, had discovered a connection to culture and land that Rebecca had never been able to give her. Dr. Chen. A woman approached, mid-40s, wearing a suit that screamed federal government. "I'm Agent Sarah Reeves, Department of Interior. Could we talk privately?" Rebecca's stomach tightened. About a research station on St. Lawrence Island, about classified materials, about your uncle's work in 1982 and 1983. Reeves smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't worry, you're not in trouble. We just need to clarify some things." They moved to a quiet corner away from the crowd. Reeves pulled out a tablet showing Rebecca satellite images of the research station, recent images taken within the last few weeks. "We've been monitoring the site," Reeves said. "The permafrost is melting faster than predicted. The main building collapsed 2 months ago. The walkways are gone. But the foundation, the concrete pad beneath the main structure, is still intact, and our ground-penetrating radar shows there's a sealed chamber beneath it." Rebecca kept her face neutral. "Old storage, probably. The station was there for years." "The chamber is lead-lined, Dr. Chen. 6 inches of lead shielding, which is unusual for geological sample storage. It suggests the contents are either radioactive or need to be protected from detection. We need to access that chamber." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because according to our records, your uncle was the last person with access to that chamber, because you inherited the property, and because we believe you have information about what's inside." Reeves leaned forward slightly. "Look, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to warn you. There are people in the intelligence community who want to send a team to forcibly open that vault. They believe it contains weapons-grade materials that pose a security risk. I'm trying to handle this diplomatically before it becomes a military operation." "What do you want from me?" "The access code, or at least confirmation that the chamber is secure and the contents aren't dangerous." Rebecca thought about her uncle's letter, about the warning never to acknowledge the vault's existence, about the 3 researchers who died in 1983. She thought about Emma, about the life they'd built, about how quickly it could all disappear if she said the wrong thing. "I don't know anything about a lead-lined chamber," she said carefully. "My uncle left geological samples in the main vault, which I properly documented and sold. If there's another chamber, he never told me about it. I've been to the site once, removed what was mine, and haven't been back. Whatever else is there is government property, not mine." Reeves studied her for a long moment. "Dr. Chen, if that chamber contains what we think it contains, and it's compromised by melting permafrost or structural collapse, the results could be catastrophic. We're talking about materials that were considered too dangerous to transport in 1983. Materials that your uncle was specifically ordered to secure and never discuss. Then secure them. You don't need my permission or my help. It's government property on government land. Do what you need to do." "It's not government land anymore. The research station was decommissioned and sold to you for $1, which means legally anything on that property is yours, including sealed chambers containing classified materials." Reeves's voice hardened slightly. "You could be charged with possession of classified government property, with failure to secure sensitive materials, with obstruction if we determine you're deliberately withholding information. Or," Rebecca said quietly, "you could acknowledge that a research station was abandoned for 40 years, that nobody cared what was in it until I inherited valuable geological samples, and that any classified materials left there are the government's problem, not mine. You want access to the site, file the proper paperwork, get a warrant, but don't stand here at my foundation's gala and threaten me with charges that won't stick." She'd learned from the best lawyers money could buy, learned that powerful organizations only pushed as hard as you let them, learned that standing firm was often enough to make them back down. Reeves closed her tablet. "I'll be in touch, Dr. Chen, but think carefully about your position. Some secrets are too dangerous to protect." After Reeves left, Rebecca's hands were shaking. She went to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and tried to steady her breathing. The vault, the damned vault she'd never opened, never acknowledged, tried to pretend didn't exist. Her uncle had protected it for 41 years. Now that burden was hers. Her phone buzzed. Text from Harold Vance. "We need to talk, not on the phone. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., my office." Rebecca drove to Anchorage the next morning. leaving Emma with a trusted friend. Vance's office felt different this time, tense, worried, like something had shifted in the 18 months since she'd first walked in. "They came to see me too," Vance said without preamble. "Different agent, same questions. They know about the second vault, Rebecca. Someone talked or someone found old records, but they know it exists and they know it contains classified materials. What do they want? Access, control, to make sure whatever's in there doesn't become public or fall into the wrong hands. And they want you to cooperate because if you don't, they'll bury you in legal challenges until you have no choice." Rebecca sat down heavily. "My uncle said those materials needed to stay buried, that people died to keep them secret, that opening the vault would be dangerous. He was right, but the permafrost is melting. The station is collapsing. In another year, maybe less, that vault will be exposed naturally. Better to control how it's accessed than let nature do it randomly." Vance pulled out a file. "I've been doing research. The materials in that vault are likely rare earth samples with weapons applications, stuff that could be used in precision-guided munitions, advanced electronics, even nuclear triggers. In 1983, that technology was cutting-edge and highly classified. Today, it's still sensitive, but less so. The government probably wants to secure the samples, verify they weren't compromised, and quietly dispose of them. So, let them. It's not that simple. If you cooperate, you maintain some control over the process. If you fight, they'll classify everything retroactively, freeze all your assets pending investigation, and make your life hell while they do whatever they want anyway. You have leverage now. Use it." Rebecca closed her eyes, thinking. Her uncle had died protecting these secrets, but he'd also trusted her to make the right decisions, not to blindly follow his instructions. What would cooperation look like? You grant them access to the site. You provide the access code if you have it. In exchange, they acknowledge your legal ownership of the non-classified materials. They provide written assurance that you won't face charges related to the vault's contents, and they compensate you fairly for the property transfer. How much compensation? Whatever we negotiate. The land is technically worth $1, but the government's need for discreet access is worth considerably more. Vance smiled slightly. "I'm thinking 20 million minimum." Rebecca almost laughed. After everything, the 389 million in samples, the legal battles, the foundation, here was the government offering to pay her more money for a vault she'd never opened and contents she'd never wanted. "Set up a meeting," she said. "Let's negotiate." The meeting happened in a secure conference room in a federal building in Anchorage. 4 government representatives, 3 lawyers, 2 Department of Defense officials, and Agent Reeves, who'd clearly been running point on this operation. Rebecca sat across from them with Harold Vance beside her and 2 attorneys from the firm that had destroyed Marcus's legal challenges. She felt strangely calm, like all the fear and anxiety of the past 18 months had burned away, leaving only clarity. Dr. Chen, one of the DoD officials, began. "Thank you for coming. We understand you've been cooperative regarding the research station property. We'd like to formalize an agreement that serves everyone's interests." "I'm listening." "We need access to the sealed chamber beneath the main station building. We need any documentation your uncle left regarding the contents, and we need your assurance that you haven't accessed the chamber or discussed its contents with anyone. In exchange for full legal indemnification, acknowledgement that the classified materials were stored without your knowledge, and fair compensation for the property transfer." "How much?" The official glanced at his colleagues. "We're prepared to offer $5 million. Harold Vance laughed out loud. $5 million? For discreet access to classified materials you've been hunting for 40 years? For Rebecca's cooperation in keeping this quiet? for her agreement not to ask questions about why 3 researchers died in 1983 or why her uncle was followed before his death. He leaned forward. "Try again. Mr. Vance, the property is assessed at $1. We're being more than generous. The property contains classified materials that you need to secure before they're compromised by climate change. That need is worth significantly more than the property's paper value. Rebecca has leverage here, and you know it." The negotiation took 6 hours. Back and forth, offers and counteroffers, veiled threats and careful compromises. By the end, they'd agreed on $32 million, complete legal indemnification, a non-disclosure agreement that worked both ways. Rebecca couldn't talk about the vault, and the government couldn't discuss her uncle's research. And a clause stating that any future mineral rights discoveries on St. Lawrence Island would be subject to indigenous land rights review before federal development. That last clause was Rebecca's addition. Tom Kaverluk had flown to Anchorage to advise her, and he'd been clear. Whatever happened with the vault, the Yupik people's interests needed protection. "Your uncle wanted that deposit to benefit the people whose land it was," Tom had said. "Make sure this agreement honors that." So she had. The clause meant that if anyone ever developed the massive rare earth deposit beneath St. Lawrence Island, the Yupik communities would have legal standing to negotiate terms, environmental protections, and profit sharing. It wasn't everything, but it was something her uncle would have appreciated. The access operation happened in April, during a brief window when weather permitted the necessary equipment to reach the site. Rebecca wasn't there. The agreement forbade her presence, but Harold Vance went as her representative, documenting everything for legal purposes. He called her 2 days later. "It's done. The vault was opened, contents removed and transported, everything secure." "What was in there?" "I don't know. I wasn't allowed in the chamber, but I saw the size of the transport containers. Whatever it was, there was a lot of it, and they treated it very carefully. Lead-lined cases, radiation monitors, multiple security protocols." He paused. "Rebecca, your uncle was protecting something significant. I think you made the right call letting them secure it." "Did they tell you anything? Give any hint about what the materials were?" "No, but one of the DoD officials thanked me for Rebecca's cooperation, said that if the vault had been compromised, if those materials had gotten out." He didn't finish the sentence, just said the world was safer because your uncle had been so careful. After they hung up, Rebecca sat in her office at the Foundation headquarters, no longer a hotel ballroom, but a proper building with staff and programs, and walls covered with photographs of the communities they'd helped, and thought about her uncle. David Chen, the strange man she'd met once at her father's funeral. The researcher who disappeared into the Arctic and never come back. The paranoid hermit who died mysteriously in Anchorage, with people following him. He'd been protecting the world, not just rare earth samples worth hundreds of millions, but something more dangerous, more classified, more critical, and he'd trusted her to continue that protection, had left her the research station, the samples, the burden of keeping secrets that powerful people wanted revealed. She'd honored that trust, had sold the legal samples, used the money to build something meaningful, and when the time came, had made sure the classified materials were secured properly without compromising her uncle's principles or the indigenous communities whose land this had all happened on. The $32 million from the government went into the Foundation's endowment. Combined with careful investment of the money from the sample sales, the Foundation now had resources to operate indefinitely, protecting land rights and supporting Native communities throughout Alaska and beyond. Emma was 14 now, confident and strong, completely unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything again. She volunteered at the Foundation sometimes, helping with mailings and event planning, talking about maybe becoming an environmental lawyer someday. Rebecca had her medical license back but hadn't returned to practice. She'd discovered that running a foundation, fighting for land rights, protecting the work her uncle had started, that was more satisfying than medicine had ever been. Marcus was out of prison now, serving probation for fraud, but Rebecca rarely thought about him anymore. He'd tried to destroy her and had only succeeded in making her stronger, more determined, more capable of handling challenges that would have broken her before. The corporations that had sued her had all settled or lost. Bering Minerals Group had gone bankrupt fighting legal challenges from indigenous communities. The Department of Interior had revised its policies on mineral rights and native land claims. Small victories, but meaningful ones. 3 years after that first phone call from Harold Vance, Rebecca stood once again on St. Lawrence Island, watching the sun set over the Bering Sea. The research station was completely gone now, collapsed into rubble and reclaimed by ice. The government had paid for environmental remediation, and the site was clean, empty, showing no evidence that anything important had ever happened there. Tom Kverluk stood beside her, both of them bundled against the cold. "Your uncle would be proud," Tom said, "not just of what you did with the money, of how you did it, honoring the land, honoring the people, protecting what needed protecting." "I'm not sure I had much choice. He set everything up. I just followed the path he'd cleared." "No, he gave you tools. You decided how to use them. That's different." Tom smiled. "The council voted last week. We're naming the new community center after him, the David Chen Center for Indigenous Rights. We want you and Emma at the dedication ceremony." Rebecca felt tears threatening. He'd have hated that. He hated attention. Then he shouldn't have been such a good man. Tom put his hand on her shoulder. "You know what he told me once? He said the best inheritance you can leave someone isn't money. It's example. A model for how to live with integrity when everything pushes you to compromise. He lived that way, and so do you." They stood in silence, watching ice floes drift through gray water, the same view her uncle had watched for 3 years while protecting secrets and documenting discoveries and waiting for the right person to trust. Rebecca thought about the journey, from divorce papers and restraining orders to basement apartments with mold, from a phone call about a $1 inheritance to vaults filled with samples worth hundreds of millions, from desperation and survival to building something that would last beyond her lifetime. "Mom!" Emma called from Tom's truck, where she and several Yupik teenagers were laughing about something. "We're going to miss the plane." Rebecca waved acknowledgement, then turned back for one last look at the empty ground where the research station had stood. "Thank you, Uncle David," she whispered, "for trusting me, for protecting what mattered, for showing me that the most valuable things are often hidden beneath layers of ice and time and difficulty, waiting for someone patient enough to look." The wind carried her words away across the tundra, across the ice, across the years and secrets and struggles that had led to this moment. And then she walked back to the truck, back to Emma, back to the life they'd built from ruins and frozen samples and an uncle's 40-year vigil. The foundation's work continued. More communities helped, more land protected, more victories won against corporations and bureaucracies and the machinery of power that tried to crush people without resources. Emma graduated high school, got accepted to Stanford to study environmental law, gave a speech at graduation about her great-uncle who'd discovered that protecting what mattered was worth more than any fortune. Rebecca attended, sitting in the audience, crying proud tears as her daughter, this girl who'd survived homelessness and divorce and a mother's complete destruction, stood on stage and talked about integrity and justice and building legacies that lasted. After the ceremony, as they walked to the car, Emma said, Mom, I've been thinking about Uncle David's research, about what he found. Do you think there's more? More deposits, more samples, more discoveries he made that nobody knows about? Rebecca thought about the second vault, about materials too dangerous to discuss, about secrets that had stayed buried even when it would have been easier to reveal them. Maybe, she said carefully, but if there are, they're protected for a reason. Your uncle spent his whole life making sure powerful people didn't exploit what he'd found. If there are more secrets, they should stay secret until someone comes along who will honor them the way they deserve. Like you did. Like we did. This was never just my journey, Em. You were part of it from the beginning, living in that basement, trusting me when I said things would get better, being brave when I was terrified. Rebecca stopped walking, took both her daughter's hands. Everything I did for you. To give you a future, to show you that even when the world tears you down, you can rebuild. You can win. You can create something meaningful from nothing. Emma hugged her mother tightly. I know, and I'm going to keep building on what you and Uncle David started. The foundation, the land rights work, protecting communities from exploitation. That's the real inheritance, isn't it? Not the money, the mission. Rebecca held her daughter and thought about legacies, about what got passed down through generations. Her uncle had given her samples worth hundreds of millions, but more importantly, he'd given her an example of how to live with integrity. And now she was giving that same example to Emma, who would carry it forward into a future Rebecca might never see. That was what mattered. Not the money, not the victories, not even the legal protections and foundation programs that would help thousands of people. What mattered was the chain of integrity, unbroken from David Chen to Rebecca to Emma, and whoever came after them. People who understood that protecting what was important required sacrifice, patience, courage, and an absolute refusal to compromise when it mattered most. 5 years after the vault was opened and secured, Rebecca received a letter from Agent Sarah Reeves. It was brief, formal, but the message underneath the bureaucratic language was clear. Dr. Chen, this letter confirms that all matters related to the research station property have been concluded. The materials secured have been properly processed and pose no ongoing security concerns. Your cooperation in this matter demonstrated both patriotism and good judgment. While the details of this operation remain classified, I can tell you that your uncle's work prevented what could have been a significant international incident. He was a hero, though his heroism must remain anonymous. You honored his legacy appropriately. With respect, Agent Sarah Reeves. Rebecca filed the letter away in the safety deposit box, with all the other documents from that strange, difficult, transformative period of her life. Then she went back to the Foundation's work, to the communities that needed help, to the ongoing battle to protect land and rights and dignity for people the system tried to ignore. The money from the samples, carefully invested, wisely managed, continued growing. The Foundation expanded to work in other states, other regions, wherever indigenous communities faced corporate exploitation or government indifference. Rebecca never forgot those months in the basement apartment, the fear and desperation, the moment she'd answered the phone and heard about a $1 inheritance. She kept a photograph on her desk, the research station before it collapsed, gray and rusted and looking completely worthless. She showed it to everyone who visited the Foundation, used it in presentations and fundraising events. This, she would say, is what possibility looks like. Broken, forgotten, dismissed as worthless by everyone who sees it. But beneath the surface, hidden in the ice, protected by patience and time, there was a fortune. Not just money, meaning, purpose, the chance to build something that matters. My uncle saw that possibility and protected it for 40 years. I inherited that responsibility and tried to honor it. Now all of you, She would gesture to the audience, to the community leaders and activists and young people who'd come to learn how to fight for their own lands and rights. You're inheriting it too. The chance to look at something everyone says is worthless and see the fortune hidden inside. The opportunity to protect what matters, even when it's difficult. The responsibility to pass this work on to the next generation stronger than you received it. And every time she gave that speech, she thought about Uncle David, living alone in an Arctic research station, documenting discoveries no one would appreciate for decades, keeping secrets that would outlive him, trusting that someday the right person would come along and understand what he'd been protecting. She'd been that person, and now Emma would be. And after Emma, someone else, carrying forward work that had started with geological samples and frozen cores but had become something much larger, a movement, a mission, a legacy of integrity that no amount of money could buy, but that one person's courage could create. Rebecca Chen had inherited a research station worth $1. She'd discovered samples worth nearly 400 million, but what she'd really inherited was something far more valuable. Proof that the system could be beaten, that ordinary people could win against corporations and government and ex-husbands who wielded law like a weapon. Proof that protecting what mattered, even when it cost everything, even when it would have been easier to give up, was worth it. Proof that sometimes the most important inheritances came from the most unexpected places and that fortunes could be hidden in the most unlikely locations, waiting for someone brave enough to look. The research station was gone now, collapsed and reclaimed by ice. But what it had protected, the samples, the secrets, the lessons, the legacy, lived on. In a foundation that helped thousands, in a daughter who would carry the work forward, in communities protected from exploitation, in land rights defended, in the ongoing battle for justice and dignity, and the revolutionary idea that ordinary people deserved protection just as much as corporate profits. That was Uncle David's real discovery, not rare earth elements or classified materials or geological samples worth hundreds of millions, but the simple truth that one person, living with integrity, protecting what mattered, refusing to compromise or surrender or give up, could change the world. Rebecca had inherited that truth along with the research station, and she'd spent every day since trying to live up to it. The fortune frozen in Arctic ice had melted and transformed into something warmer, something human, something that would outlast any bank account or property deed or mineral deposit. Something that mattered, and that, in the end, was worth more than all the rare earth elements in the world. The end. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.